She smiled when she said it, her lips curving around the words like they were some playful sin. "You'd make a hot mafia boss," she teased, wiping down the bar as if she hadn't just spoken a sentence that could peel back the skin of my world. I should have laughed, brushed it off like men do when they're trying not to be seen for what they are. But I remember standing there, frozen for just a second, because she had no idea how close she was to the truth, how dangerously her tongue had grazed the edge of a knife she couldn't even see. The lounge was half lit that night, gold lamps reflecting off the glasses, soft jazz curling through the air like smoke, and the city outside was murmuring its usual song, sirens, engines, whispers of people chasing whatever they thought salvation looked like. I'd built this place as a front, a quiet corner of my empire, a spot where blood didn't flow and names didn't matter. But when I walked through the door that night and saw her standing behind my bar, I knew peace wouldn't last long. She wasn't supposed to be there. The manager had hired her while I was in Naples handling some business. And by the time I came back, Lena Rossi was already part of the place, slinging drinks with a grin sharp enough to cut glass and eyes that made men forget their vows. She was quick with her words, quicker with her smiles, and completely unafraid in a way that made the air around her hum. Most women who came near me felt it, that instinctive unease like an animal sensing a predator in the tall grass. But not her. She looked at me like I was just another man, maybe a little too serious, maybe a little too dangerous, but human. That was her first mistake. I sat at the far end of the bar, my usual drink untouched, pretending to watch the game on the overhead TV while really watching her. The way her fingers brushed the rim of a glass, the way her shoulders swayed to the rhythm of the music, the way her laughter melted into the low hum of conversation. It all drew me in like gravity itself had decided to play a cruel trick. She was light in a place I'd built from darkness, and I should have turned away before she became a weakness. But I've always been a man who lingers too long near the flame. When the drunk came in, a heavy-set guy in a wrinkled suit with more whiskey than manners, I saw the shift in her face. She didn't panic when he raised his voice, didn't shrink when he slammed his hand on the counter. She just straightened her back, chin high, and said, "You've had enough for tonight, sir." Calm, steady, defiant. He grabbed her wrist. I was on my feet before I even realized I'd moved. "Let go," I said quietly, because I don't believe in shouting. It ruins the effect. He turned, tried to square up like he thought I was another man he could intimidate. I could smell the whiskey on his breath when he muttered something about minding my own business. The next few seconds happened the way muscle memory does, without thought, without hesitation. My hand closed around his wrist, twisted until I heard a crack, and then I pushed him back just hard enough for him to stumble into the wall. No one said a word. The music kept playing, the city kept breathing outside, and the only sound that filled the air was the slow exhale of his pain. I didn't break eye contact with him when I spoke, but I knew she was watching me. "Apologize." He did. Then he left. When I turned back, Lena was looking at me. Not scared, not trembling, but curious. Like she was trying to piece me together, like she wanted to know what kind of man could make someone twice his size fold without breaking a sweat. "Thanks," she said, voice low but steady. Then that damn smirk appeared again. "You'd make a hot mafia boss, you know that?" It was a joke, a throwaway line, but for me it was a blade pressed to the truth. I remember the way the words hung between us, heavy and sweet. I could have told her then. I could have leaned forward, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, and said, "Careful what you wish for, sweetheart. You're closer than you think." But instead I just smiled, or whatever passed for a smile on me, and said, "Yeah, I'll keep that in mind." She laughed, bright and easy, and turned back to pour another drink, completely unaware that her joke had slipped past the armor I'd built over years of blood and betrayal. Later that night, when the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, I found myself still sitting there, still watching her. She was humming to herself, cleaning glasses, her hair pulled loose from the braid she always wore. I should have left hours ago, but something in me wanted to memorize her. The way her lips moved when she spoke, the tiny crease between her brows when she concentrated, the warmth she carried like it belonged to another world. When she caught me staring, she didn't look away. "You're here a lot," she said. "Don't tell me it's the drinks." "It's the service," I replied, and it made her laugh again. She leaned forward on the bar, elbows on the polished wood, eyes glinting beneath the dim light. "You're not like the others, are you?" "What others?" "The ones who come here to forget who they are. You look like a man who never forgets." That hit closer than she knew. I'd built an empire on memory, remembering every slight, every betrayal, every face that smiled before pulling a trigger. Forgetting wasn't an option in my world. But I just tilted my head, keeping the darkness where it belonged. Maybe I just like the view. Her lips parted, and for a second neither of us said anything. The silence was thick, charged, and full of things that didn't belong in the open. Then she broke it with a playful grin. "Careful, or I might start thinking you're flirting." "Would that be so bad?" I asked. She didn't answer, but the way her eyes lingered on me was enough. When I finally left that night, the city felt different. Colder. Louder. The rain had started to fall, and as I walked to the car, I caught myself thinking about her laugh, about the fearless way she'd looked at me. It had been years since someone had done that. Looked without fear, spoken without calculation, smiled without wanting something in return. In my line of work, women came and went like smoke. Beautiful, temporary, and never safe to hold. But Lena was different. She didn't know it yet. But she'd walked right into the lion's den, and the worst part was, I wasn't sure I wanted her to leave. That night, lying awake in a bed far too big and cold, I could still hear her voice. That teasing tone that had somehow pierced through everything I was. "You'd make a hot Mafia boss." She had no idea how right she was, and the part that kept me awake, the part that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt in years, was the quiet truth whispering in the back of my mind. If she ever found out who I really was, she'd never look at me like that again. But I already knew I wouldn't be able to stay away long enough to prevent it. Tomorrow, I told myself. I'll see her again tomorrow. And that's how it starts. Not with a plan, not with a threat, but with a joke from a girl who had no idea she'd just tangled herself with the devil. It had been 3 days since she called me a hot Mafia boss, and I'd spent every damn hour since trying to convince myself to stay away from that lounge, from her, from the way her laugh still echoed somewhere behind my ribs like a melody that refused to fade. I told myself I didn't have time for distractions, that I had business to handle, meetings with men who wore smiles that hid knives, and territories that needed reminding who owned them. But even as I sat across from one of my lieutenants, discussing numbers, shipments, routes, and silence money, I caught myself glancing at my watch, counting hours, thinking of her hands polishing a glass or the tilt of her head when she teased. It's funny how something as small as a woman's voice can crack through years of discipline, how it can slip through armor meant to withstand bullets and betrayals alike. I'd spent half my life learning to be untouchable, to walk into a room and make everyone else feel the temperature drop. And yet all it took was one girl with whiskey-colored eyes and a dangerous sense of humor to make me feel something I hadn't in years. Alive, curious, restless. I told myself I wouldn't go back. But when night came, I found myself in front of the same building again, standing under the amber glow of the streetlight, the city humming low and restless around me. I told myself it was business, that I needed to check on the place, make sure everything was running smooth. It was a lie, of course, but lies have a way of sounding reasonable when you whisper them softly enough. The bouncer nodded when he saw me, his posture straightening instinctively. Inside, the music wrapped around me like smoke. Low jazz, soft lights, murmured conversations. And there she was, behind the bar, her hair pulled into a messy bun this time, a few strands falling across her cheek. She was laughing with a customer, her body angled just enough to show the curve of her shoulder, and I felt something sharp twist inside me. Something possessive. Something primal that had nothing to do with logic or strategy. She saw me before I could look away. Her eyes lit up, surprise flickering into amusement. "Well, well," she said when I took my seat at the bar. "I thought you were just a one-night mystery." "Maybe I don't like being a mystery," I said, watching the way she moved, the way her voice softened the edges of the night. She grinned, leaning closer, her perfume subtle, something floral with a hint of danger beneath it. "Then maybe you're not trying hard enough." I should have left it there, but I didn't. The night slipped by in pieces. Quiet conversations, shared glances, the soft slide of her fingers as she handed me a drink. I told her small truths wrapped in bigger lies, that I owned a few businesses around the city, that I traveled a lot, that I liked quiet places because they reminded me of peace. She listened, curious, asking questions that felt harmless but weren't, not really. Every time she tilted her head and waited for my answer, I felt the walls around me thin, piece by piece. "Do you ever get tired of being in control?" she asked suddenly, her voice low enough that it felt like a secret. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. No one ever asked me that. Not my men, not my enemies, not the women who came to me with painted smiles and practiced submission. "Control keeps people alive," I said finally. She studied me for a long moment, then smiled, that same soft, dangerous smile that seemed to see too much. "You say that like you don't include yourself in that equation." Her words lingered, heavier than they should have been. Before I could respond, Matteo, my second, my oldest friend, the only man who knew everything, appeared beside me. He was wearing that look he always did when he thought I was about to make a mistake. "Boss," he murmured, leaning in. "Need a word." Lena's eyes flicked to him, curious at the title. I ignored it. "What is it?" Matteo didn't lower his voice much, but the tone was clipped. "We got word that the Santori boys have been sniffing around the Lower East Side again. Maybe looking for a weak link. Thought you'd want to know." The words sank into me, dark and steady, like the pull of a storm. I nodded once, my face neutral, but inside, everything sharpened. "Handle it," I said quietly. He hesitated just a fraction before adding, "She's trouble." His eyes flicked toward Lena, then back to me. "You know it, and I know it. Don't mix worlds, Dom. You've done too well keeping them apart." I didn't answer. He left. When I turned back, she was pretending to wipe down the counter, but her curiosity was written all over her. "Boss?" she repeated, the word tasting different in her mouth, playful but edged. "It's just a nickname," I said easily, though my pulse had shifted gears. She arched a brow. "Sure it is." There was something in her tone. Teasing, yes, but probing too. Like she was peeling back the layers without realizing how dangerous that could be. I found myself smiling, despite the weight settling in my chest. "You ask too many questions, Lena." "You give too few answers," she shot back, then leaned forward again, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her eyes. "Makes a girl curious." "Curiosity," I murmured, "is a dangerous habit. So is showing up where you shouldn't." She had me there. I stayed longer than I should have. We talked about everything and nothing, music, travel, the way the city never really sleeps. And as the night deepened, I felt something unraveling inside me. Every rule I'd ever written for myself. Never mix business with pleasure, never let someone in, never let a stranger make you forget who you are, began to sound less like commandments and more like excuses. When the bar finally closed, she walked me to the door, her breath visible in the cool night air. "You really don't talk about yourself much, do you?" she said softly. "Not much to tell." "I don't believe that for a second," she replied, folding her arms. "You've got that look, the kind people get when they've lived through things that don't fit neatly into conversation." I could have told her the truth then, that she was standing inches from the man whose name made entire families cross themselves before speaking it, that my hands had built an empire out of ashes and blood. But instead I just said, "Maybe someday I'll tell you a story." She smiled. "I'll hold you to that." And then, before I could stop myself, I reached out, fingers brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. She didn't flinch, didn't pull back, just looked up at me with that steady gaze that could undo a man faster than a bullet. "Good night, Lena," I murmured. "Good night, mystery man," she said. "Try not to break too many hearts before you come back." I walked away before I could do something reckless, but even as I slid into the car, I could feel her presence clinging to me, the echo of her voice curling around the part of me that still remembered what it felt like to be human. Mateo was waiting at the curb, engine running, expression unreadable. "You keep going back there," he said, "and it won't be long before someone figures it out. Her, or worse." I didn't respond. The city outside the car window blurred by, streets I owned, corners that bled loyalty, buildings that whispered my name. But none of it felt as sharp, as real, as the sound of her laughter echoing in my head. I should have listened to him. Because by the next night, when the first gunshot shattered the glass of that same lounge and chaos tore through the place like a storm, I realized something I should have known all along. The moment I walked back into her world, I dragged mine in with me. The night it happened, the air was heavier than usual. That kind of New York humidity that clings to your throat and tastes faintly of metal and rain. The kind that makes you feel like the city itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I should have listened to that silence, that small shift in the rhythm of things that only men like me notice. Men who've spent their lives watching patterns and learning what they sound like when they're about to turn deadly. But I didn't. Because I was too focused on her. Too distracted by the thought of her smile, the warmth of her voice, the way she'd started to become the one corner of my world untouched by blood. When I walked into the lounge that night, I remember thinking how ordinary it all looked. The lights were soft, the crowd was low, and Lena was there behind the bar, hair down this time, strands falling around her face in a way that made her look both wild and soft, like something untamed had found its place among the noise. She saw me, smiled in that way that made my pulse do something unfamiliar, and waved with the confidence of someone who didn't know the kind of men who watched her from the shadows. I took my usual seat at the end of the bar, the same spot where her joke had first cut through my armor, and she came over, towel slung over her shoulder, eyes glinting with mischief. "You again," she said, pouring my drink before I could ask. "You're going to make people think I'm your favorite bartender." "Maybe you are," I said, my tone even, but my eyes never leaving hers. She laughed, the sound soft and real, and for a fleeting second the world felt almost normal, as if I were just another man, and she was just another girl, and there wasn't an empire of violence lurking beneath the surface of everything I touched. But peace is a fragile thing. It never lasts in my world. The first crack came not in sound, but in instinct, that subtle pull in my gut that told me something was wrong. Mateo's voice echoed in my head from the night before. "You're blending worlds that don't mix." I'd built my life on control, on keeping lines drawn clean between business and everything else. But that night, those lines blurred the moment she leaned across the counter, close enough for me to smell the faint trace of citrus on her skin, and whispered, "You've got that look again, like you're somewhere else." I didn't have time to answer, because that's when the glass shattered. It wasn't loud at first, just a single sharp crack that sliced through the music, then another, then the scream that followed as chaos erupted. Gunfire, short bursts, sharp and merciless, cutting through the air like thunder. I was on my feet before thought even caught up to instinct. "Down!" I yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind the bar, just as another bullet tore through the shelf of liquor above us, glass raining down like diamonds and blood. She gasped, not from fear but from shock, eyes wide, heart racing. "What the hell is happening?" she breathed, voice trembling but steady enough to make me look at her. Really look at her. And realize that no matter how much danger she was in, she hadn't broken yet. "Stay down," I said, pressing her hand against my chest as if that could anchor her to me. "Don't move." The next few minutes were chaos. Chairs overturned, customers screaming, the sound of footsteps and gunfire blending into a symphony of violence that I knew far too well. My men, the ones who were always stationed nearby, were already moving. Shadows flickering at the edges of the room, returning fire, securing exits, handling it the way we always did, efficiently, quietly, without witnesses left standing. When it was over, the music had stopped, the lights flickered, and the smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air. My pulse was still hammering when I finally looked down at her. She was staring at me, breath uneven, a small cut blooming red across her cheek where the glass had caught her. I reached out without thinking, brushed the blood away with my thumb, and for a long, dangerous moment, we didn't speak. "Who were they?" she whispered. I could have lied. I should have. But the truth was too close. Too heavy. "Wrong place," I said quietly, though I knew that wasn't true. The men who'd come tonight weren't amateurs. They weren't random. They were Santori men, rivals who'd been itching to send me a message, and they'd just sent it loud and clear. "You're slipping, Moretti." I helped her up, steadying her with one arm around her waist. She was trembling now, adrenaline fading, eyes searching my face for answers I couldn't give her yet. "You knew this could happen?" she said suddenly, anger flashing through the fear. "You knew something like this could happen, and you still came here?" There it was. That fire again. The thing that both drew me in and burned me alive. "You're not safe here," I said instead, ignoring her question because there was no version of the truth that wouldn't make her run from me. "Apparently neither are you," she snapped, but there was a tremor in her voice that betrayed her. I turned, signaling to Matteo, who had appeared in the doorway, gun still drawn, jaw tight. "Clear it," I said. "No names, no trails. Handle the bodies." Lena's eyes widened. "Bodies?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. I met her gaze. "You didn't see anything, understand?" Her breath caught. Fear, disbelief, maybe both. "Dominic, what are you—" "Lena!" I stepped closer, lowering my voice until it was almost a growl. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." For a moment, she just stared at me, and I could see it. The flicker of realization, the slow unwinding of suspicion into something dangerous. She wasn't stupid. She was putting the pieces together. The word boss from Matteo's lips, the men who obeyed me without hesitation, the way I'd moved during the chaos, calm, deliberate, unshaken. She took a step back, eyes flicking between me and the blood pooling near the shattered glass. "Who are you?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Matteo interrupted. "We've got to move," he said. "Cops'll be here in 10. I looked at her one last time, trying to read the storm behind her eyes. "Go home," I told her. "Now." "I'm not leaving until you tell me what's going on," she said, stubborn as hell even with gunpowder still lingering in the air. I could have told her the truth. that she'd just stumbled into the orbit of a man whose name made the city tremble, that everything she thought she knew about me was built on lies and blood. But I didn't. I just said, "Please, Lena, go." Something in my voice must have broken through because she hesitated, then nodded slowly. "This isn't over," she whispered, "not by a long shot." She turned and walked out, her silhouette framed by flashing red lights from the street beyond, and I stood there watching her go, feeling something inside me shift, something that felt dangerously close to regret. Mateo came up beside me, his voice low. "You know she saw too much." "I know," I said, lighting a cigarette with hands that weren't as steady as I'd like. "You should end it before it gets worse." I exhaled smoke and watched it curl toward the broken ceiling. "I can't," I said finally, because the truth was I didn't want to. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, the city's lullaby for men like me. And somewhere beyond the flashing lights, Lena Rossi was walking home through the dark, carrying questions that could get her killed if she ever found the answers. But she would ask them anyway. I knew her well enough already to know that. And that meant one thing. This wasn't the end of the danger. It was the beginning. I didn't plan on seeing her again so soon, but plans are fragile things when emotions start to bleed into them, and I've never been good at letting go of the things I shouldn't want. 3 days had passed since the shooting at the lounge. 3 days of silence that should have been enough to erase her from my mind. But somehow every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. The defiant set of her jaw, the blood on her cheek, the way she looked at me like she knew I was lying even when I didn't say a word. I told myself she'd walk away, that fear would keep her distance, that whatever curiosity burned inside her would flicker out before it got her killed. But that was me underestimating her again, because Lena Rossi was not the kind of woman who ran from fire. She was the kind who looked at it and wondered how close she could stand before it consumed her. It was early evening when she showed up at my office. No call, no warning. Just the sound of the elevator door sliding open and her walking in like she owned the place. The security downstairs had let her through, probably because she had that look. The kind that made people forget their training. The kind that slipped through defenses like smoke. She was wearing a dark coat, her hair loose, her eyes sharp with purpose. "Nice place," she said, her tone casual but her hands clenched around the strap of her bag. "You're not exactly who you said you were, are you, Dominic?" I leaned back in my chair, suppressing the instinct to smile. "What makes you say that?" she scoffed. "You had men with guns at a bar that's supposed to be a quiet little business investment. You gave orders like someone used to being obeyed. People called you boss. So either you're running the most disciplined janitorial service in New York, or you're hiding something a hell of a lot darker." Her courage fascinated me. The way she spoke to me, the way her voice trembled only slightly, the way she refused to step back even when she should. Most people flinched under my gaze, but she met it head on, unblinking, like she was daring me to confirm her worst suspicion. I stood and walked toward her, slow enough for her to decide whether she wanted to stay or run. She didn't move. When I stopped in front of her, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath, I said, "You shouldn't be here." "Why?" she challenged. "Because I might find out who you really are." I studied her face, the mix of defiance and fear, and something else simmering beneath it, something that looked a lot like longing. "Because people who ask too many questions about me don't usually get to keep asking them." Her pulse quickened. I could see it fluttering just below her skin, but she didn't back down. "Then you'll have to kill me," she said, and for a second, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, at the quiet audacity in her voice. Instead, I reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "Don't tempt me, Dolcezza," I murmured, and the word rolled off my tongue like smoke. "You don't know what you're playing with." She exhaled shakily, eyes darting between mine, searching for some trace of the man she thought she knew. "Then show me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Show me who you are, Dominic. There are moments in a man's life where a single choice divides everything before and everything after. That was mine. Dinner, I said finally. Tonight. You want answers, you'll get them. But you won't like what you hear. Her brow furrowed. Dinner? That's your idea of full disclosure? My idea of a warning, I said. And she must have seen something in my expression, something dark and final, because she hesitated, then nodded. Fine, she said. Dinner. The restaurant was one of mine, dimly lit, quiet, with a private corner that overlooked the city through tall glass windows. The staff didn't speak when we arrived, didn't ask questions, didn't even make eye contact. They knew better. She noticed, of course. She noticed everything. People treat you differently? She said as I pulled out her chair. I give them reasons to, I replied, and she laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. Over dinner, we talked in circles. She asked about the lounge, about the men who worked for me, about the shooting. I deflected, offering half-truths and careful silences. She called me out on every one of them. Somewhere between the second glass of wine and the main course, her irritation turned into something sharper. I'm not stupid, Dominic, she said, voice low but steady. I've read about the Moretti family. I've heard the stories, the disappearances, the money laundering, the little wars no one talks about. And now here you are, sitting across from me, with that same name you never bothered to mention. You think I don't see it? I stared at her for a long moment, then leaned forward. You think you want to know, I said softly, but you don't. Once you do, there's no going back. She swallowed hard. Then don't make me guess. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered how someone like her could exist in a world like mine, how someone so full of light could still sit across from a man built out of shadows and not flinch. Finally, I said, what would you do if I told you everything they say is true? She blinked, her fingers tightening around her glass. Then I'd want to know why. The simplicity of it struck me harder than I expected. Not how, not when, not who. Just why. Because someone had to, I said after a long silence. Because when my father died, I inherited more than a name. I inherited debts, enemies, a city carved in pieces by men who smiled while they slit throats. Because walking away wasn't an option. Because power doesn't forgive weakness. And the only way to survive is to be the man everyone else fears. She didn't speak. Her expression didn't change. But I saw it. The flicker of understanding mixed with horror. The realization that the man sitting across from her wasn't the kind of man you dated or teased or flirted with at a bar. I was the kind of man people prayed they'd never owe anything to. Do you regret it? She asked finally. I took a long breath. Every day, I try not to. The silence between us stretched, thick and heavy, until the waiter returned to pour more wine and disappeared again without a sound. When she finally looked up, her eyes weren't afraid. They were steady. You should have told me sooner, she said. Would you have stayed? I don't know, she admitted, but I would have understood. That honesty, quiet, painful, raw, undid something in me. I leaned back, watching her in the dim light, the way her hands trembled just slightly as she lifted the glass to her lips, the way she tried to keep her composure even as her world tilted on its axis. You should walk away now, I said quietly, while you still can. She smiled, small, defiant, the same smile that started all of this. You don't scare me, Dominic. I reached across the table, took her hand in mine, and felt her pulse race beneath my fingers. Then you should, I whispered, because I don't lose what's mine. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. She just looked at me, eyes wide and unguarded, and I realized then that it was already too late. For both of us. When I walked her to her car later, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, she stopped before getting in and turned to face me. "You know this doesn't change anything," she said. "I still want to see you." I stared at her, fighting the urge to close the distance between us. "You have no idea what you're saying." "Maybe not," she said, "but I know what I want." And then she leaned up, pressed her lips to mine, soft, unexpected, devastating, before pulling back and whispering, "Good night, boss." I stood there long after she drove away, watching her taillights disappear into the darkness, and for the first time in years, I felt something I couldn't name. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was close. Too close. And as the night swallowed her car, I realized with a cold certainty that I'd just invited her deeper into a world that would eat her alive. I told myself I wouldn't see her again after that night. That one dinner was enough to remind me why men like me don't get to touch things that shine too brightly. But self-control has always been a fragile lie when it comes wrapped in silk and laughter and the scent of someone who doesn't know what it means to be afraid of me. The days that followed blurred into one long ache. Meetings, deals, messages coded in numbers and names, and yet in the middle of all of it, I kept hearing her voice echoing in the back of my mind, soft and dangerous, saying, "You don't scare me, Dominic." That was the thing about her. She said it like a challenge, like she didn't know how close she was to standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into the kind of darkness that swallows people whole. When she called me, it wasn't fear that colored her voice, but irritation, like she couldn't decide if she wanted to scold me or tempt me again. "You disappeared," she said. "No text, no call, not even a smoke signal. Am I supposed to assume that's part of your mysterious boss thing?" I'd been sitting in my office at the time, the city stretching wide and glittering beneath the window, my men stationed outside, their voices muffled through the closed door. And for a second, I let myself smile. A small, dangerous curve of the mouth that didn't belong to a man who should be smiling at all. "I told you to stay away," I said. "And I told you I don't listen well," she shot back. And there was a pause. That tiny moment where I heard her breathing slow, like she was trying to decide whether she'd already crossed a line. "Dinner again," she said finally. "My turn." It wasn't a request. That's what I remember most about that night. Not the dinner itself, not the restaurant, not even what we said. What I remember was her daring me, in that quiet way she had. To let her in. To let her see past the lines I'd drawn. And the worst part was, I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to. The truth is, I'd spent years wearing the same face. Calm, collected, lethal when necessary, polite when useful. I'd perfected the art of pretending to be human, of sitting at tables with men who ordered death like dessert, and smiling as if I hadn't already decided which of them wouldn't see the sunrise. But with her, the mask slipped. It always did. Every time she looked at me, I felt something raw shift inside, something I thought I'd buried a long time ago, something like hunger. Not the kind that can be sated with flesh or wine or power, but the kind that aches for something clean, something real. She arrived late, as always, in a dress that didn't belong in the kind of world I lived in. Soft, blue, innocent, in a way that made the air feel heavier. The restaurant was quiet, candlelight flickering across her skin, her eyes searching mine for something I wasn't sure I still had. "You look like you've been thinking too much," she said, sitting across from me. "I always think too much." She smiled faintly, stirring her drink. "About me? Among other things? Liar." I wanted to tell her she was right. I wanted to tell her that the reason my nights felt longer lately, the reason the sound of my own heartbeat seemed louder, was because of her. But then my phone buzzed. One vibration, then two, then silence. It was Matteo, which meant it wasn't something that could wait. I excused myself, stepping outside to the narrow alley behind the restaurant. Matteo was already there, his face shadowed under the dim streetlight, a cigarette burning low between his fingers. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "One of the law firms handling the Santori investigation, the one we thought was clean, isn't." I frowned. "How bad?" "Bad enough that one of their junior associates has been poking around your businesses. Files, ledgers, the works. She's asking questions that could lead right back here." "Handle it quietly," I said. "Who's the associate?" He hesitated, and that pause, that single, silent hesitation, was enough for the world to tilt. "Who?" I repeated. He met my eyes. "Lena Rossi." For a moment I didn't breathe. The noise of the city faded, the hum of engines and laughter and sirens turned distant, unreal. My chest tightened, and a single thought flashed through my head. Not anger, not betrayal, but disbelief so sharp it almost hurt. "No," I said quietly. "You're wrong." "She's been part-time at Crestwood and Hale for almost 2 years. They've got a contract with the feds to look into financial crimes. The Santoris are the headline, but you and I both know these things overlap. She's probably chasing a lead without realizing where it goes." "Without realizing who it goes to," I muttered, running a hand over my jaw. Matteo's eyes were steady. "You need to fix this, before someone else finds out, because if she connects your name to the Moretti accounts, it won't be the Santoris who come knocking. It'll be the feds." He left me there with that truth, and for the first time in years, I didn't know what to do. When I walked back inside, she was still sitting there, unaware that the ground beneath her was about to collapse. She looked up when I approached, smiling faintly, but there was something in her expression. Curiosity, guilt, maybe both. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Fine," I said, though the word felt like glass in my mouth. She leaned forward, tracing her finger along the rim of her glass. "You have that look again," she said softly. "The one that makes me think you're keeping something from me." "I am." The honesty in my voice startled even me. Her eyes flickered, searching my face, and for a second I thought she might push, might ask the question that would end us both. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled, that same fearless, reckless smile, and said, "Then maybe someday you'll trust me enough to tell me what it is." If she only knew. The rest of the evening passed like smoke. Words and laughter and the quiet hum of something neither of us could name. But I couldn't shake the image of Matteo's face under that streetlight. Couldn't shake the sound of her name attached to a threat. When I dropped her off at her apartment later, she lingered by the door, her hand on my arm, her eyes full of something that made it hard to breathe. "You know," she said softly, "for a man who claims to be dangerous, you're not nearly as cold as you want people to think." I stepped closer, brushing my thumb along her jaw, memorizing the warmth of her skin. "That's where you're wrong," I murmured. "I'm colder than you'll ever understand." She smiled, not believing me, and kissed me. Good night. A slow, unguarded kiss that tasted like promises neither of us could keep. I watched her go inside, waited until her light flickered on through the window, then turned and walked away. The night pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Back in the car, Matteo was waiting, his voice low. "So what's the plan?" I stared out the window, watching the glow of her apartment blur in the distance. "I don't know yet," I said, "but one way or another she can't keep digging." He nodded. "And if she already knows too much?" I didn't answer. Because the truth was simple and cruel. If she kept chasing the truth, I'd have to choose between the woman who'd made me feel alive again and the empire I'd built from bones and blood. And no matter which one I chose, something would die. It started with the rain. Soft at first, the kind that kissed the city in whispers, then heavier, more insistent, the kind that made everything blur at the edges. I've always hated rain, not because of what it was, but because of what it reminded me of. The sound of it against the windows the night my father died. The smell of it when I buried my first body. The way it made the city's sins run through the gutters like ink from a broken pen. That night, the rain fell the same way, thick and relentless, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of it pressing against my chest like a warning I refused to hear. Lena hadn't called me in 2 days, and that silence did something to me I couldn't explain. I told myself it was better that way, that she needed distance to forget what she was starting to piece together, that I needed time to make sure she didn't end up in a crossfire she couldn't even see coming. But underneath the logic, underneath the careful walls I'd built around reason, there was something raw gnawing at me. A restless panic that came with the realization that for the first time in years, I cared about someone who wasn't part of the business, someone who didn't owe me anything, someone I couldn't control. Mateo had been right about one thing. She'd been digging. I had confirmation the night before. One of my men intercepted a call from a Crestwood and Hale contact asking about a set of offshore records tied to one of my shell companies. Her name was on the inquiry. Whether it was intentional or not didn't matter. In my world, curiosity was a death sentence, and I was the one who signed it. I told myself I'd talk to her, warn her properly, make her understand that what she was walking into wasn't a game. But even as I rehearsed the words, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. She wouldn't believe me. Not entirely. She'd push. She'd demand answers I couldn't give her without putting her name on every list that got men killed. And still, I couldn't bring myself to send someone else to do it. If there was a line between my world and hers, I'd already crossed it the moment I kissed her. When I finally went to see her, the storm had deepened. The city was drowning in it, streets glistening, headlights smeared across wet asphalt. Her building sat on the corner of 7th, small and old, the kind of place that smelled faintly of coffee and faded paint. I knew every shadow within 3 blocks, every camera, every exit. Still, my pulse quickened when I reached her door. She opened it before I could knock twice. Her hair was damp, curling slightly from the humidity, and she wore one of those loose sweaters that made her look softer than she had any right to. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just looked at me. Tired, cautious, but not afraid. "I was wondering how long it would take you to show up," she said quietly. "You've been watching me, haven't you?" I didn't bother denying it. "It's not safe for you right now." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "I think that ship sailed the night someone shot up my workplace." "Lena." "No, you listen to me," she interrupted, stepping closer, her voice trembling with something between anger and heartbreak. "I don't know what game you're playing, Dominic, but I'm not stupid. The firm I work for has been investigating financial movements that lead to one of your companies. You think I wouldn't notice? You think I wouldn't connect the dots?" Her eyes searched mine, looking for the man she thought she'd met. The one who smiled quietly at her jokes, who pretended to be just another restless businessman. But there's only so long you can hide behind the version of yourself you build for others. I said nothing. And sometimes silence says everything. She shook her head, her voice breaking slightly. "You lied to me. Every word, every look. It was all just part of the act, wasn't it?" I stepped forward, my voice low, rough. "No. Don't twist this. I lied about who I was, yes, because it kept you alive. Because if you knew me, truly knew me, you'd already be dead." "Then what am I now?" she whispered, her hands trembling at her sides. "Because it kind of feels like I'm already halfway there." There are moments when words become useless, when all that's left is truth, heavy and brutal. I reached out, catching her wrist before she could pull away. "You think you can just walk out of this? You think the people I deal with will let you keep breathing after you've seen what you've seen, asked what you've asked? You're in it now, whether you want to be or not." She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw the fear. Not of me, but of what she'd stumbled into. "Then what happens now?" she asked. Before I could answer, there was a sound outside. Faint at first, then sharp, unmistakable. Tires screeching, doors slamming, footsteps. My blood went cold. I pushed her back instinctively, hand reaching for the gun at my waistband as I moved to the window. 3 cars, black, unmarked. The Santoris. I'd recognize that kind of arrogance anywhere, showing up in the open, like they wanted me to know who it was. "Get down!" I hissed, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see them moving across the street. "They found you." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Found me?" "They think you're leverage," I said, already checking the weapon, sliding around into the chamber. "They must have found your name connected to the files. They'll use you to get to me." She stared at me, eyes wide, realization dawning with a kind of horror that cut deeper than fear. "Dominic!" "Stay behind me," I snapped, as the first bullet hit the door. The next few minutes unfolded in chaos. Wood splintering, glass shattering, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the air. I fired back, controlled, precise, the way I'd been trained since before I was old enough to shave. 2 down before they crossed the threshold, another crawling back toward the stairs. The rain made everything slick, the thunder masking the sound of pain. When it was over, she was still there, pressed against the wall, eyes glassy, hands shaking but alive. I moved to her, cupped her face, and for a long moment I didn't know what to say. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, a tear cutting through the soot on her cheek. "You just killed them," she whispered. "I saved you," I said, though the words felt hollow. She stepped back, her voice trembling. "Saved me from your world." There was no denying it anymore. No masks left, no lies that could cover the truth. She'd seen it. The violence, the control, the darkness I carried like a second skin. "I told you to walk away," I said, softer this time, almost pleading. "And you came after me anyway," she replied, her voice cracking. "So tell me, Dominic, was it because you wanted to protect me or because you didn't want to lose your favorite secret?" I looked at her, rain dripping from my hair, the sound of sirens growing faint in the distance, and I realized that she didn't understand, that it wasn't about secrets or control anymore. It was about something far more dangerous. "You don't belong in my world, Lena," I said, voice low, unsteady. "But now that you're here, I can't let you go." Her breath hitched, and for a moment the silence between us was louder than the rain, louder than the city itself. Then she whispered, "Then I guess I'm yours now, whether I want to be or not." And I should have told her that she wasn't, that I'd find a way to get her out, that I'd burn every bridge to keep her safe. But the truth was, in that moment, as I pulled her against me and felt her heartbeat against mine, I knew it was already too late. Because the war had begun. And the blood oath I'd sworn to my family, to my empire, to the life I could never escape, it now included her. The night after the shooting felt like the longest, one of my life. The kind that stretches endlessly across the dark, where every second weighs heavier than the last, and every breath feels like a negotiation with something unseen. The rain hadn't stopped. It came down in sheets, drumming against the windows of my penthouse like it wanted to get inside. Like it was reminding me that no matter how high above the city I lived, I was never really untouchable. The skyline bled through the fog, blurred lights flickering like dying stars, and somewhere in that quiet storm sat Lena, wrapped in one of my shirts, hair damp, eyes distant, her silence louder than any scream I'd ever heard. I'd brought her here because there was nowhere else left for her to go. Her apartment was compromised. Her name had been passed through too many hands, and the Santoris had made their move. If I hadn't been there, she'd be dead. That truth should have justified everything. The guns, the blood, the lies. But watching her sitting there, small against the vastness of the room, I couldn't escape the feeling that I'd dragged her into something far worse than death. She hadn't spoken since we arrived. Not a word. Not when I patched the cut on her shoulder. Not when I poured her a drink. Not even when I tried to explain that she wasn't safe anywhere but here. She just watched me, her expression unreadable, her eyes following me like she was studying a stranger, or maybe an enemy. Finally, she said, "So this is where you live?" Her voice was flat, distant, but underneath it was something else. Disbelief, anger, heartbreak all bleeding together. "This is where I survive," I corrected quietly, pouring myself another drink I didn't need. She stood, crossing her arms, the shirt hanging loose around her. "You kill people, Dominic. You lie, you manipulate, you pull strings and expect everyone to dance. And you call that survival?" I set the glass down slowly, letting the sound of crystal against marble fill the silence between us. "I call it what it is. Survival doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't care who it ruins. It's not pretty, Lena. And it's not fair. But it's the only language power understands." Her eyes darkened. "Then teach me the translation, because right now all I see is a man who decided being feared was better than being human." The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit, and for a long moment I said nothing. I turned toward the window instead, watching the rain trace slow patterns down the glass, wondering when I'd stopped noticing the difference between control and loneliness. "I wasn't always this," I said finally, my voice quiet but steady, like I was confessing to something I hadn't spoken aloud in years. "You think I wanted this life? You think I woke up one morning and decided to build an empire out of fear? I inherited it, Lena. My father ran this city before me, and when he died, he left me a kingdom built on blood. I tried to run from it once, thought I could build something different, something clean. But men like me don't get to walk away from legacy." She said nothing, but I could feel her watching me, her breath shallow, her anger turning into something colder, understanding. "I was 19 when I saw my first execution," I continued, my hand tightening around the glass. "A man who'd stolen from my father. I remember thinking there had to be another way. But my father, he looked at me, right before he pulled the trigger, and said, 'Mercy gets you killed in this business.' And I believed him. Every decision I've made since then, every line I've crossed, has been because of that moment." I turned back to her, meeting her eyes. "You wanted to know who I am? That's who. The man who learned too early that kindness is a luxury, and love is a weakness. The man who keeps his enemies close and his heart locked behind 1,000 walls. The man who should have stayed away from you." Her lip trembled, but her voice didn't break. "Then why didn't you?" "Because I'm selfish. Because I'm weak where you're concerned. Because for the first time in years I felt something that wasn't just hunger or hate. Because I wanted to believe there was still a part of me that could be touched without turning everything to ash. But I didn't say any of that. I just looked at her and said, 'Because you made me forget what I was.'" She blinked, and in that fragile pause I saw the fight drain from her shoulders. "And what are you now?" "Something worse," I whispered. The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling like distant cannon fire, and she stepped closer, her bare feet silent against the floor. "You could have killed them," she said. "The Santoris. You could have ended it before it ever reached me." "I did kill them," I said, voice low. "But power doesn't bleed from one body. It spreads. You cut off one head, 3 more grow back. That's how this world works. There's always someone waiting to take the throne." She studied me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't name. "And what about you? What happens when someone decides it's your turn to fall?" I smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "Then I'll fall. But I'll take everyone who tries with me." Her silence stretched again. long enough that I thought she might walk away, might leave me standing there with the ghosts that never stop whispering. But instead, she did something I didn't expect. She reached for me. Her fingers touched mine, tentative but deliberate, her voice barely audible when she said, "You scare me, Dominic." "You should." "But not for the reasons you think," she continued, her voice trembling now. "You scare me because when I look at you, I don't see the monster everyone else would. I see the man underneath, the one who still believes he can be saved." Her words hit like a gunshot, clean and brutal. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that men like me don't get redemption, that every good thing we touch ends up rotting from the inside out. But before I could find the words, she stepped closer, close enough that I could feel her breath against my skin. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. "I don't know if it's love or insanity or something in between, but I can't stop wanting you, even when I should hate you." I closed my eyes, my control fracturing, and when I opened them again, I pulled her against me, my lips finding hers in a kiss that wasn't gentle, wasn't sweet. It was desperation made flesh, a confession in the language I knew best. Her hands tangled in my hair, her body pressed against mine, and for a moment the world fell away. No blood, no fear, no empire, just us, breathing each other in like the only truth left in a world built on lies. When she finally pulled back, her eyes glistened in the dim light. "Tell me it's real," she said. "Tell me I'm not just another thing you'll destroy." I brushed my thumb over her lips, my voice rough. "It's real," I said. "And that's the problem. Because love was the one thing I couldn't control. And in my world, anything I couldn't control eventually turned to ruin." She didn't answer. She just leaned her forehead against mine, both of us breathing in sync, both knowing the storm outside wasn't done, not by a long shot. And as the rain kept falling and the city drowned beneath it, I understood something terrible and inevitable. This wasn't a love story. It was a confession, written in blood, waiting for the world to collect its due. Love has a way of softening men who should never be softened, dulling instincts that once kept them alive. And I suppose that's what made me reckless. The way she looked at me like I was still capable of being more than a monster. The way her touch rewrote the rhythm of my days until I stopped hearing the sound of danger approaching. I had spent my life learning to anticipate betrayal before it happened, to smell it in the air like smoke before the fire ever took hold. But with Lena, I let myself believe I could live outside of consequence, as if love could rewrite bloodlines, as if her heartbeat could drown out the centuries of violence carved into my name. For a while, it almost felt possible. The days that followed our confession blurred into a fragile kind of peace, one that felt both stolen and undeserved. She stayed in the penthouse, not because I asked her to, but because she seemed to understand that leaving would paint a target on her back, that the city beyond those walls had started whispering her name in tones meant for ghosts. She tried to make the space feel human again, coffee brewing in the mornings, her books stacked carelessly across my desk, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in rooms that once smelled only of whiskey and rain. And God help me, I liked it. I liked waking up and seeing her curled against me, hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink, her hand resting on my chest as if she could keep the darkness inside me from escaping. But peace never lasts in my world. It never has. And it never will. It always comes before the storm, that sharp inhale the universe takes before everything collapses. It began with a call. Mateo's voice on the other end, low and edged with something I hadn't heard from him in years. Fear. "They're moving," he said. "The Santoris have new backing. Out-of-town investors, serious ones. Money, men, firepower. They've hit 2 of our shipments already, and the word on the street is they're coming for the source next." "The source," I repeated slowly. my hand tightening around the phone as my eyes drifted toward the window where Lena stood, her silhouette framed by the gray morning light. "You," he said simply. I didn't answer right away. I just watched her for a moment, watched the way she reached out and touched the glass like she was tracing the city's pulse, unaware that it was already closing in on her. "Double security," I said finally. "No one moves without my say." "Dom," Mateo's voice hardened. "This isn't just business anymore. They know about her." That one sentence felt like a blade sliding between my ribs. "How?" "Someone inside. Don't know who yet. But they've been feeding the Santoris intel for weeks. Names, locations, everything. They know you've gone soft, and they're going to use it." I hung up without another word. There was no need for more. Mateo understood me well enough to know what silence meant. When I turned back, Lena was watching me, her brow furrowed slightly, concern flickering in her eyes. "Bad news?" "Nothing you need to worry about," I said automatically, and she tilted her head. That small, knowing gesture that always made me feel seen in ways I didn't know how to handle. "Every time you say that," she said softly, "something bad happens." She wasn't wrong. I wanted to tell her the truth then, that people were coming for her because of me, that the same hands that had tried to destroy me would use her as leverage, as bait, as punishment for making me feel something human again. But the words stuck in my throat. Love makes men believe in impossible outcomes, and for a moment I clung to that lie, the one that said maybe if I was careful enough, violent enough, fast enough, I could keep her untouched by the rot of my world. But fate is cruel, and it has a way of taking what you love most and twisting it until it screams. It happened that night. I'd left to meet Mateo, a quick discussion at one of our safe houses, no more than 30 minutes away. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened, the air heavy with the scent of exhaust and something metallic. When I returned, I knew something was wrong before I even stepped out of the elevator. The hallway was too quiet, the kind of silence that hums before a storm breaks. The door to the penthouse was cracked open, a sliver of light spilling into the hall like an accusation. My gun was in my hand before I even realized I'd drawn it. Inside, the place was chaos. The couch overturned, glass shattered, the faint smell of gunpowder lingering in the air. My heart stopped when I saw the smear of blood on the floor, small but deliberate, leading toward the window. "Lena!" I called, my voice sharper than I intended, echoing through the vastness of the room. No answer. I moved through the space like a ghost, every nerve on fire, every instinct screaming that I was too late. And then I saw it. The photograph she'd kept on the counter. The one of her and her sister now cracked down the middle, and beneath it a single playing card. The Black King, marked with a thin slash of red ink. The Santoris' calling card. My pulse turned to steel. For a long time I just stood there, staring at that card, letting the weight of it settle into my bones. And then, without another thought, I called Mateo. "They took her," I said. My voice was calm, but inside I was unraveling. "Find out where. Find out who gave them her name. I don't care what it takes." "Dom, do it." I hung up and went to the liquor cabinet, poured a drink I didn't taste, and stared out at the city as the storm began again. Lightning flashing against the skyline like veins of light running through an open wound. I'd been angry before. I'd been ruthless, merciless, vengeful. But this was different. This wasn't business. This wasn't power. This was personal. She'd walked into my world without understanding the cost, and I'd let her. I'd let her believe that love could exist here, that she could touch something clean inside the dirt. And now she was gone, taken by men who thought they understood what kind of monster I was. They didn't know yet. They would. I poured the drink out. the amber liquid splashing across the marble like blood, and I whispered a quiet promise to the empty room. Not to her, not to God, but to myself. "I'm coming for you," I said, "and whoever took you will learn what it means to bleed slow." When Matteo called back an hour later, his voice was grim. "We found them. Old warehouse on Pier 42. They've got her surrounded. Heavy security. 6 men minimum, maybe more." "I'll handle it," I said. "You're not thinking straight, Dom. I've never thought clearer in my life." I ended the call, strapped on my weapon, and took one last look around the apartment that still smelled like her. Coffee, rain, and something heartbreakingly alive. I thought about the way she'd smiled at me that morning, the way her fingers had brushed mine, the way she'd said, "Every time you say it's nothing, it's always something." She'd been right again. As I stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. The same face the city feared, the same eyes that had watched too many men die. But now there was something else there too. Something colder, more dangerous than I'd ever seen before. Love hadn't made me weaker. It had given me a reason to burn the world to ash. And by the time the elevator reached the ground floor, I already knew. The Santoris had no idea what they'd started. The rain had stopped by the time I reached the docks, but the air still smelled like thunder, thick and sharp and charged with the promise of violence. The city was asleep above me, unaware that beneath its glittering skyline, a different kind of storm was about to break, one that wouldn't leave water in its wake, but blood. I remember thinking how quiet it was, how the silence pressed against my ears until it felt almost deafening, how my heart beat like a drum I couldn't silence. Somewhere in that silence was Lena, surrounded by men who thought they could use her name to carve fear into mine. They didn't understand that I'd already made peace with being feared. It was love that made me dangerous. The warehouse stood at the end of the pier, an old skeleton of rusted metal and broken windows, lit by the flickering glow of a few hanging lamps. I moved like a shadow, every step measured, every thought reduced to instinct. Matteo was supposed to meet me there, but I'd left before he could stop me. I didn't want reason. I wanted retribution. Inside, the smell of salt and oil and gunpowder mingled in the damp air. I could hear voices. Low, male, careless. Laughter that didn't belong in a place like that. I slipped between stacks of crates, my hand steady on the gun at my side, and the closer I got, the more I could hear her voice. Muffled, trembling, but alive. That sound cut through everything, through the noise in my head, through the ghosts that had been whispering my name since I was a boy. I saw her then. She was tied to a chair near the center of the room, a single bulb swinging overhead, casting long shadows across her face. There was blood on her lip, her cheek bruised, but her eyes, God. Her eyes were still defiant, still burning with that same fire that had undone me from the start. 3 men stood near her, 2 of them armed, the third pacing slowly, his expensive shoes leaving faint echoes on the concrete. I recognized him immediately. Carlo Santori, the youngest of the brothers, arrogant, cruel, too eager to prove himself in a world that devoured the untested. "You know, Moretti," he was saying, voice slick and mocking. "I almost admire you. You hide behind the illusion of control better than most. But everyone's got a weakness. And now I've got yours." I stepped out of the shadows before he could say another word. "Then I suppose you've finally run out of luck," I said, and the sound of my voice made all 3 of them turn. The room shifted instantly, guns drawn, tension snapping like a wire. Carlo's smirk faltered when he saw my face. "Dominic," he said, almost laughing, though I could see the tremor in his jaw. "Didn't expect you so soon." "You should've," I said. "You touch what's mine, and I come for you." He gestured toward Lena, his smirk returning. though it didn't reach his eyes. Yours? She doesn't look like the kind of woman who belongs to anyone. I moved closer, slow, deliberate, my voice low and steady. Let her go, and maybe I'll make your death quick. He laughed. You won't shoot me, Moretti. Not here, not now. You've got too much to lose. Word on the street says your men are restless. Matteo's been questioning orders. Maybe they're tired of your obsession with a girl who doesn't know her place. That name, Matteo, hit me like a blade. I froze for a fraction of a second, and in that pause, Carlo smiled wider, like he'd just pulled a string and was watching the world unravel. What did you just say? I asked quietly. He tilted his head. You really didn't know? The air between us shifted. My grip tightened on the gun, but I could feel it then. That faint tremor in the foundation, that small invisible crack that comes right before everything collapses. Matteo's voice echoed in my memory. The warnings, the hesitations, the way he'd known too much too soon. Carlo saw the realization hit me, and he laughed again, the sound sharp and ugly. He's been selling pieces of you to us for months, Moretti. Not because we paid him, because he's tired of living in your shadow. He thinks you've gone soft, thinks this woman has made you forget who you are. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was lying, but deep down, I knew. I'd felt it in Matteo's silences, in the way he'd looked at me lately. Not with loyalty, but pity. Where is he? I asked, voice flat. Carlo shrugged. Probably watching right now. The words barely left his mouth before a shot rang out, slicing through the air, hitting one of his men square in the neck. Chaos erupted instantly. Shouting, gunfire, the metallic clang of bullets ricocheting off steel. I dropped to one knee, returned fire, 1, 2, 3 shots, clean and final. When the smoke cleared, only Carlo was left, bleeding from his shoulder, his face pale with shock. You think you can kill me and walk away? He rasped. I don't plan on walking, I said, and pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the silence that followed. I dropped the gun and went to Lena. She was shaking, tears streaking her face, but when I untied her hands, she grabbed mine so tightly it hurt. I thought, she started, but her voice broke. It's over, I said, though even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. It never is. We moved toward the door, but before we reached it, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Gun raised. Matteo. For a second, the world stopped moving. He looked different. Older somehow. Tired. His eyes met mine, and there was no apology in them, no hesitation, only resignation. You shouldn't have come alone, Dom, he said softly. You made it too easy. Why? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. He sighed, lowering the gun slightly. You stopped being the man we followed. The moment she came into your life, everything changed. You started protecting instead of conquering, feeling instead of leading. You forgot who you are, and I couldn't watch you burn everything we built. So you sold me out. I saved us, he said quietly. You think love makes you stronger, but it doesn't. It makes you careless. I wanted to shoot him, but my hands wouldn't move. This was Matteo, the man who'd saved my life a dozen times, the one who'd carried me through the worst of the wars, the one who'd once sworn that betrayal was a language he'd never learn. He looked past me at Lena, his expression hardening. She's not worth it, Dom. Don't, I said, stepping between them. Move, he said. No. We stood there for a long, unbearable second. Two men who'd once been brothers, now standing on opposite sides of a war neither of us could win. The sound of the rain outside crept back in, a quiet rhythm against the metal roof. Then the gun went off. The sound was softer than I expected, a muted crack swallowed by the storm. I didn't know who fired first, maybe him, maybe me. But when the smoke cleared, He was on the ground, blood spreading beneath him, his eyes still open, still full of that same disappointment that had been there since the beginning. Lena's voice broke through the ringing in my ears. "Dominic," she whispered, grabbing my arm, her voice thick with panic. "We have to go." But I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at Mateo's body, the man who'd been my brother, my second, my mirror. The betrayal burned through me, hollow and merciless. When I finally turned to her, my voice was barely a whisper. "It's over." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. Because outside, in the distance, I could hear sirens. Not the Santoris. Not my men. The cops. And I knew, with a kind of cold, sinking certainty, that the final act of this story wasn't going to end with a bullet. It was going to end with the truth. They say when the end comes, it doesn't announce itself with thunder or fanfare, but slips quietly into the room like smoke. You don't even realize it's there until you can't breathe anymore, until the weight of everything you've done presses against your ribs and refuses to let go. I'd always imagined my ending would be loud, a blaze of bullets and vengeance, the kind of death men like me are built for. But standing there on that rain-soaked pier, Mateo's blood on my hands, and the wail of sirens cutting, through the darkness I realized the truth was far more cruel. The end doesn't come with fire, it comes with silence. The kind that follows betrayal. The kind that lives in the eyes of the woman who has seen too much of you to ever look at you the same again. Lena was trembling beside me, her face pale in the flashing red and blue light that bled through the warehouse windows. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the shock that still clung to her bones. She'd seen everything, the gunfire, the blood, Mateo's final breath. And though I wanted to tell her it would fade, that memory doesn't work like that. The first time you take a life, it stays with you. It follows you into every quiet room, every dream, until it becomes part of your shadow. "Dominic," she whispered, her voice breaking like glass. "We have to go. Now." The sirens were getting closer, the lights brighter. But for a moment I couldn't move. I was staring at Mateo's body, the man who had been my brother in every way that mattered. And all I could think about was how betrayal feels different when it comes from someone who once would have died for you. It doesn't just wound you, it hollows you out, leaves you walking through the wreckage of your own loyalty, wondering where you went wrong. "Go ahead," I said finally, my voice rough, foreign even to my own ears. "Take the car. Head north. Follow the river. I'll find you." She shook her head violently. "I'm not leaving you, Dominic." "You have to," I said, more sharply this time. But the look in her eyes stopped me. That mix of fear and defiance that had always been her signature. The same look that had pulled me toward her from the beginning. "I've already lost too much," she said softly. "Don't make me lose you too." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't have an answer. The police lights flared brighter through the broken windows, and in the distance I could hear the dull thud of helicopter blades cutting through the fog. My name had been whispered for years in this city. In alleyways, in boardrooms, in the kinds of places where power and sin shake hands. But now it wasn't being whispered anymore. It was being shouted, broadcast, hunted. Mateo's betrayal hadn't just handed the Santoris an advantage. It had given the feds everything they needed to finally tear down the Moretti Empire. "Please," she said again, her voice trembling now. "Let's go." I looked at her, really looked, and something inside me cracked open. I'd spent my entire life fighting to protect what was mine, my name, my territory, my control. But for once, I wanted to protect something that wasn't built from fear. I reached out, touched her face, felt the warmth of her skin beneath my hand, and whispered, "Then we go together." We slipped out the back, moving through the maze of crates and rusted machinery, the night air thick with the scent of rain and salt and smoke. Every sound was amplified, the creak of metal, the splash of footsteps in puddles, the pounding of my heart in my chest. Somewhere behind us, the warehouse erupted with shouts and gunfire, the last act of a play I no longer wanted to star in. We made it to the car. A black sedan waiting in the shadows, one of a dozen I'd kept hidden for nights just like this. I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and drove. Neither of us spoke for miles. The city fell away behind us, its towers swallowed by fog, its sins fading into the distance. The road ahead was endless and empty, lined with the ghosts of choices I could never undo. After an hour, she finally spoke. "Where are we going?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere they can't find us." She stared out the window, her reflection ghostly against the glass. "Do you think that place exists?" "Not for men like me," I said, "but maybe for you." Her voice softened, almost breaking. "Don't you dare talk like that." I smiled faintly, but there was no joy in it. "You still think you can save me?" She turned to me, eyes fierce despite the tears brimming there. "I don't want to save you, Dominic. I just want to love you. Isn't that enough?" It should have been. God knows it should have been. We reached the outskirts of the city by dawn. The rain had stopped completely, the horizon painted in muted shades of gray and gold. I pulled off the road near an overlook, the ocean stretching out below us like a dark mirror. For a long time, neither of us said anything. She rested her head against my shoulder, and I watched the sun rise over a world that no longer belonged to me. "You could still run," I said finally, my voice low. "Change your name, disappear. They'll come for me first, but if you go now, they'll lose the trail." She lifted her head, looked at me like she couldn't believe I still didn't understand. "If you think I'm leaving you after everything, you don't know me at all." I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, and for once, let myself imagine a different ending. A quiet life somewhere far away, her laughter echoing through rooms that didn't reek of smoke and regret. But even as I pictured it, I knew it was a dream built on ashes. You can't outrun who you are. You can't scrub the blood from your name. And then the headlights appeared on the horizon. Black SUVs, fast, precise, too organized to be coincidence. Lena saw them the same moment I did. "Dominic." "I know." She reached for my hand, her grip tight, trembling. "We can still—" But she didn't finish the sentence because we both knew there was no still. There was only now. I killed the headlights, stepped out of the car, and drew my gun. The ocean wind tore at my coat, cold and relentless, carrying the faint echo of sirens in the distance. The sun was climbing higher now, slicing, through the fog like a blade. I looked back at her, the woman who had walked into my darkness and somehow made it feel like light. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to lose everything and not care. "If they get past me," I said quietly, "you drive. Don't look back." She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "I can't." "You can," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "Because that's what strength looks like. You think it's me standing here holding a gun, but it's you, Lena. It's always been you." She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to hold herself together. "Dominic, please." But there wasn't time for more. The cars stopped at the edge of the cliff road, doors flying open, men spilling out like shadows, guns raised, voices shouting orders I couldn't hear over the sound of my pulse. I turned toward them, feeling the familiar calm settle over me, that razor-edged clarity that comes only in the moments before everything ends. I could taste the salt in the air, feel the weight of every sin I'd ever committed pressing against my skin. And somewhere behind me, Lena whispered my name, soft as prayer. I smiled, not because I wasn't afraid, but because for the first time I knew exactly who I was. Dominic Moretti, son of a sinner, king of a broken city, lover of the one thing I was never meant to have. I raised my gun, aimed, and whispered, "For you." The world erupted in sound, gunfire, shouts, the roar of engines, and in that chaos, time stopped. I didn't feel the bullets. I didn't feel the ground give way beneath me. I only felt the warmth of her hand as she reached for me one last time. They say the ocean takes everything eventually. The blood, the sins, the names. And maybe that's what redemption looks like in the end. Not forgiveness, not peace, but surrender. As the light swallowed everything, I heard her voice again, faint and trembling, carried by the wind. "You'd make a hot Mafia boss," she'd said once, laughing, not knowing the truth. And maybe she was right. Maybe I did. But all I ever wanted was to be the man she believed I could be.